Samuel Caldwell rodeava sozinho pela estrada poeirenta que serpenteava pela imensidade silenciosa da fronteira. O sol se punha no horizonte, tingindo as planícies secas de um laranja melancólico, e ele sentia o peso das perdas recentes afundando ainda mais em seu peito. Dono de uma vasta fazenda, até então símbolo de força e prosperidade, carregava agora a marca da solidão imposta por uma vida de sacrifícios e recordações que se recusavam a desaparecer. Cada passo da sua montaria parecia ressoar contra o eco da dor que o acompanhava. A vastidão da terra ao redor não era apenas espaço, era uma testemunha muda da luta constante por sobrevivência. O vento seco carregava o cheiro da terra queimada pelo sol. As folhas agitadas pareciam sussurrar histórias antigas, e o crepitar distante de animais noturnos trazia consigo uma inquietante expectativa. Samuel cruzava essa solidão com o semblante fechado, cada olhar lançado à estrada à frente, refletindo a calma tensa de quem já fora ferido uma vez demais. Na mesma trilha, uma figura esguia e determinada movia-se com dificuldade. Na relé, viúva Apache custava carregar o peso da vida em seus ombros, enquanto guiava seus 2 filhos exaustos por entre as pedras e a poeira. Suas roupas puídas e rostos marcados pela luta denunciavam noites sem descanso e dias de incerteza. Ela olhava para trás com um misto de medo e esperança, sabendo que abrigo era um luxo raro e perigoso. A necessidade urgia, e cada novo amanhecer era uma batalha silenciosa contra a vulnerabilidade que teimava em dominá-los. Quando a poeira levantada por seus cavalos se encontrou, Samuel reduziu o passo e observou aqueles seres tão frágeis diante da imensidão da fronteira. Houve um instante breve em que o silêncio falou mais alto do que palavras, antes que com um gesto contido ele apertasse os lábios e oferecesse seu convite para que encontrassem refúgio em sua propriedade, apesar dos olhares de desaprovação e cochichos que já cercavam aquele ato. Sabia que a rancorosa comunidade local não veria com bons olhos o acolhimento de uma viúva Apache e seus filhos. Ainda assim, sentiu a voz da compaixão superar o medo da rejeição. Os primeiros dias sob o teto de Samuel foram cheios de olhares desconfiados e silêncio pesado. Nahel observava as paredes que guardavam o conforto contra o frio que mordia a noite, enquanto seus filhos tentavam decifrar os rostos alheios, cheios de curiosidade e reserva. Samuel, por sua vez, mantinha-se vigilante, percebendo as pequenas tensões que se formavam, como a suspeita contida nos sussurros e as vozes que corriam pela cidade como o vento cortante da planície. Apesar dos gestos lentos e cuidadosos para estabelecer um ambiente de segurança, a sombra da desconfiança era um fantasma constante. Quando o crepúsculo terminou, a escuridão encheu a fazenda com um silêncio pesado, cortado apenas pelos passos ásperos de um grupo de colonos que se aproximava, suas vozes carregadas de ameaças veladas e rancorosas. Comentários duros e olhares frios deixaram claro que a paz oferecida por Samuel era tênue e precária. As palavras cortavam o ar como facas, anunciando que aquela noite seria apenas o começo de um conflito inevitável. Muitos companheiros de jornada que acompanham nossas lendas por estas terras esquecidas nos contaram que o destino ou o algoritmo traiçoeiro do YouTube às vezes desfaz suas inscrições sem aviso. Antes que a próxima trilha perigosa se revele e uma nova reviravolta aconteça, Dê uma espiada rápida aí embaixo do vídeo e garanta que você ainda está inscrito em nosso bando para não perder o fio da meada. Não queremos que você perca nenhuma das vozes que ecoam deste vale. Verifique sua inscrição agora e junte-se à nossa saga. Samuel stood at the edge of his sprawling farmstead as dawn crept over the horizon. The first pale light painted the wooden fences and weathered barns in soft hues, casting long shadows that stretched like faded memories. Across the cracked earth, the presence of Nahele and her two children, though still new, had begun to weave itself quietly into the sinew of this land, tentative threads bridging two worlds. Inside the modest house, Nahele observed the children as they sat hesitantly in the flickering firelight, their eyes wide yet weary, absorbing this strange new life, and roughened by years of solitude, carried a confession. I thought the emptiness would kill me faster than any bullet. His eyes clouded with old wounds, stories untold. Nahele nodded, the unspoken weight between them growing heavier and yet somehow less suffocating. For the first time, two souls scarred by loss found a mirror in each other's pain. Days slipped by with silent adjustments. The children struggled to grasp the rhythms of this world. Different meals, different people, unfamiliar clothes, the mess of English spoken hurriedly by Samuel's workers. They mirrored Nahele's cautious optimism, watching Samuel with guarded hope. His own routines fractured, the rigid boundaries of his daily life bending to make space for laughter, small and fragile, from his new family. Outside the fences, murmurs swirled through the town like wildfire. Tales of attacks flared between colonists and Apaches, deepening fissures in the already brittle peace. Samuel's property, once seen as a fortress of stability, now felt like a tinderbox, ready to ignite with the slightest spark. One evening, as the sun sank behind distant hills, Nahele sat beside Samuel on the veranda, the breeze carrying the scent of sage and dust. She spoke softly, words chosen with care. The land does not forget cruelty, nor kindness. It remembers the blood soaked into its soil. Samuel absorbed her voice, the weight of history folded within it. He realized the fear threading through the town was more than suspicion. It was the echo of battles that had never truly ended. Yet amid this persistent unease, moments of fragile peace blossomed. Samuel taught the children to ride, their small hands gripping reins with tentative trust. Nahele tended a small patch of herbs, her knowledge of healing bridging the cultures with quiet power. The farm breathed with new life, pulses of laughter and hope threading through its wooden beams. But fate, merciless as the desert sun, had not relinquished its grip. One night, a distant flicker caught Samuel's eye from the edge of the farm. Flames licked hungrily at a stable, sending orange tongues curling toward the darkened sky. Panic coiled tight in his chest as he sprinted toward the blaze, heart hammering against ribs. Workers roused, rushing to fight the fire's hungry spread amid the crackle of burning wood and the acrid sting of smoke. Nahele's children huddled in the house, eyes wide and trembling, the surreal horror etching itself deep. Samuel's hands, normally steady, shook with the urgency of the moment. Despite desperate efforts, the fire ravaged the outbuilding, a hollow monument to destruction in the dead of night. At dawn, the farm lay charred in places, the burnt scent lingering, clinging to the cool morning air. The tight-knit community, already on edge, whispered in dark corners. Fingers began to point, suspicion blooming like bitter thorns. Some voices dared to name Naheli's family first, scapegoats of fear and hatred. Samuel's jaw clenched with frustration. Every glance from the town felt sharp, slicing doubt into their fragile sanctuary. Returning to the house, he found Naheli standing by the window, her profile stoic but tensed. "They believe we are the flames," she said, voice calm but resolute. "But fire reveals truth as much as it destroys." Samuel nodded, the corroding weight of prejudice becoming more palpable. He promised silently to protect her and the children, to fight the shadows cast by others' fears. That evening, the horizon glowed faintly again, the memory of fire still smoldering in hearts and soil alike. The fragile hope Samuel had begun to nurture with Naheli felt endangered, balanced on a knife's edge. As the day closed, a creeping dread settled over the farmstead. A warning whispered on the dry wind. Someone was watching, waiting. And in that silence, the threat became real. Then came the chilling news. A stable had burned, but no culprit was found. Fear froze the breath of all who lived here. The town held its breath, the uneasy truce fracturing with every whispered accusation. Samuel stared into the encroaching dusk, resolve hardening like tempered steel beneath the weight of expectation. The fragile family he had dared to form hung in the balance, tethered to the uncertain mercy of a restless frontier. The embers died away, but the suspicion they left behind was a spark that could ignite much more. And somewhere beyond the shadows, eyes watched, waiting for the next move. The farm stood silent, tense, awaiting the storm to come. The fire's smoke had barely settled over the ruined stable when the villagers gathered, eyes flashing with accusation as cold as the dawn air. Murmurs swelled into sharp whispers aimed like arrows at Naheli and her children. The once subtle glances of doubt had mutated into open hostility. They had become scapegoats for the shadow that had scorched Samuel Caldwell's land. Samuel stood at the edge of the gathering crowd, tension twisting low in his gut. "Enough," he said, voice steady but firm, pushing through the heavy silence. "Naheli and her children did not start that fire." But words proved fragile against the rising tide of prejudice. A neighbor spat on the dry earth near Samuel's boot. "They say it's the Apache kin spreading their kind of trouble. Fires, thefts, this land's not large enough for both worlds." Samuel's jaw clenched. The whispers carried the old hatred. Ancient wounds reopened like raw scars. Yet in his chest, a fierce, protective flame kindled, burning brighter than any fear. This family, as fragile and foreign as they felt to. Townsfolk were now woven into his heart. To turn his back on them would be to fracture something long denied. A chance at belonging, at redemption. That evening found Samuel in the small sitting room with Naheli, her figure silhouetted by the fading light. She remained calm, but her eyes mirrored the cold storm swirling outside. "They hunted us before," she said softly, voice steady. "Now they hunt my children, yet we survive." He reached out, catching her hand for a fleeting moment, a silent vow passing between them. "I'll shield you, all of you," Samuel promised, "no matter the cost." Days passed as Samuel sought to bridge the gulf separating his world from Naheli's, an unknown land of customs, stories, and sorrow. Naheli spoke little, but when she did, it was with quiet dignity. Slowly, Samuel learned her language's cadence, the meanings held in gestures and glances. He began to comprehend the depth of her strength, forged in fire and loss. One cold afternoon, the rumble of hoofbeats shattered the tense peace. Ezra, Samuel's trusted friend and former soldier, arrived with a steady stride. His presence was a silent reassurance amid the storm of suspicion. "I heard about the fire," Ezra said, eyes scanning the gathering villagers. "Looks like trouble brewing." His voice held the rough kindness of a man who had seen too much but refused to yield. Together, Samuel and Ezra sought to calm the jittery community. Ezra's experience on the frontier gave him a measured voice, capable of tempering fear without silencing it. At the heart of their mission was a question no one dared ask aloud. Could a man who had built walls around himself let those walls crumble to protect strangers branded as enemies? Yet, tensions only deepened. The village meetings grew heated, accusations snarled beneath strained civility. Some neighbors seized every opportunity to brand Naheli's family as outsiders, dangerous enough to be expelled, an easy target for fear masquerading as reason. Samuel's nights grew sleepless, thoughts tangled between protecting his new family and the mounting pressure from his peers. He watched as Naheli's children navigated mistrust with quiet resilience, their small faces hardened beyond their years, carrying burdens that no child should bear. In moments stolen from the maelstrom, Samuel sat beside Naheli beneath the vast sky, their breaths rising in the chill. "How do you find strength?" he asked, voice heavy with unspoken pain. Naheli's gaze met his, unwavering. "Strength was not given. It was taken by fire and loss," she said, "and by the will to live, to protect what remains." It was then that Samuel realized the true measure of survival was not in walls or weapons, but in the fragile thread of trust they now fought to weave. But the fragility was shattered when Samuel received the letter, crude, ink-smeared, and jagged at the edges. The words scrawled inside carried a deadly ultimatum: expel the Apache woman and her children from his land, or face consequences dark and terrible. Tightening his fingers around the paper, Samuel felt the weight of a crossroads pressing down on him. The frontier had never been kind to those who dared stand between two worlds. To protect his growing family meant inviting the wrath of a community steeped in suspicion and fear. Ezra's steady hand on his shoulder was the only anchor. "You're not alone in this, Sam," he said quietly. "But this fight, it'll test everything you've got." That night, as shadows lengthened and the wind whispered threats through the bare branches, Samuel stared into the dim firelight flickering against the walls of his home. Across the room, Naheli's children huddled close, unaware of the storm gathering beyond their fragile sanctuary. His gaze hardened with resolve, This family, once strangers thrown together by fate, had become his reason to defy the bitterness festering in the town. Whatever price awaited, Samuel knew he could not stand down. Outside, the village slumbered uneasily, caught between fear and fury, while the land itself seemed to hold its breath. And somewhere among the trembling stars, the first letter of many threats lay waiting, a grim whisper of danger yet to come. The sun had barely risen when the patrolling riders appeared, their silhouettes sharp against the awakening sky. Colonel Hawkins led them, his stern face carved with years of unwavering discipline and hardened prejudice. His eyes bore suspicion before he even set foot on Samuel's land, and his posture spoke of finality rather than welcome. Samuel met Hawkins by the weather-beaten gate, his voice firm, yet restrained. "Colonel, the land belongs to no race alone. We can live side by side, as neighbors." But Hawkins glanced past him, scanning the rustic homestead where Naheli and her children moved quietly, shadows wrapped in uncertainty. "There's no place here for your kind, Caldwell," Hawkins said, voice edged with contempt. "This is the West. Order must be kept. Apache blood brings nothing but trouble." The words hit Samuel like a blow, yet he held his ground, the lines of his face tightening with resolve. Inside the modest house, Naheli sat at the worn wooden table, her fingers clasped tightly. The morning light revealed the faint tremble in her hands, a quiet echo of a pain she buried deep. She looked up as Samuel entered, finding strength in his steady gaze. Behind her calm, a secret simmered, a shadow cast by the loss of her husband, taken in a merciless ambush, a wound. Yet fresh in the corridors of her heart, "That man," she whispered, voice low and steady, "he does not understand the scars we carry, the blood spilled on paths we once called home." Her eyes held a mixture of sorrow and simmering defiance. "But with you here, maybe there is a chance for peace." Samuel knelt beside her, the weight of her truth settling heavy. "I don't fully understand yet," he admitted, "but I want to learn, to carry that burden alongside you." Outside, the two children, little faces solemn yet curious, wandered the dusty yard. Their laughter, rare and fragile, peeked through the walls of suspicion and fear. Samuel watched as the youngest clumsily chased after a stray dog, his small hands reaching out for a brief moment of innocence. These children, more than any wealth or land, began to anchor a part of Samuel that had long been hollow. But the distant rumble of horses and raised voices shattered their fragile calm. The patrol was tightening its noose around the farm, their every move a silent message that tolerance was not in their creed. Samuel stepped once more toward Colonel Hawkins. "There is no threat here, only a family trying to survive. I ask you to see beyond old wounds." Hawkins laughed bitterly. "You sympathize too much, Caldwell. That sympathy will be your undoing." With that, he signaled his men, who dispersed to watch every corner of the property. Later, as night began to settle, Naheli stood outside, beneath a vast, unforgiving sky. The stars blinked cold and distant, but inside her, fires burned that no darkness could quench. She told Samuel of the ambush, the bloodshed that stole her husband, a man of honor, caught in a web of greed and betrayal. "It was not just death," she said softly, her voice thick with remembrance. "It was a lesson in what men become when fear rules their hearts." She turned to face him, eyes shining fierce. "You must understand this, if you hope to protect what remains of my family." Samuel nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her story. The frontier was more than land and law. It was the battleground of souls haunted by ghosts that refused to rest. Inside the house, the children's steps echoed faintly in the quiet. The eldest, delicate but fierce, clutched a small wooden carving, a token from her father, a symbol of their heritage and hope. The youngest, restless and wide-eyed, stole glances at Samuel, sensing the kindness beneath his stern exterior. A soft smile broke across Samuel's lips as he approached them. "Come," he said gently, "you are part of this family now." There was a tenderness in his voice, an awakening of emotions long dormant. He lifted the youngest child into his arms, feeling a surge of protectiveness swell within. The little boy's small hands gripped him tightly, anchoring Samuel to a newfound purpose. The boundaries of race and prejudice blurred in that moment, replaced by the immeasurable weight of love and belonging. But peace remained fragile. That night, as the farmhouse settled under a pale moon, a chilling silence descended. Samuel's eyes remained open long after the firelight dimmed, scanning the horizon beyond the fences. Somewhere out there, in the shadows cast by the flickering stars, a threat lingered, unseen but palpable. His breath caught when he noticed the absence. The youngest child was gone. A hollow ache spread through Samuel's chest. The boy's empty bed stood witness to a nightmare unfolding. Naheli's face, once calm and brave, crumpled in shock and raw fear. Samuel rose, the protector awakening fully within him. "We will find him," he promised, voice steady despite the storm raging inside. Outside, the night whispered its dark secrets. The watchful eyes of the patrol and the cruel townfolk pulsed with suspicion and quiet malice. But inside the walls of that humble home, a bond forged in pain and hope, prepared to defy the coming tempest. The farm held its breath. The child was missing, and the fragile threads of peace began to unravel. The sun had not yet fully risen when the desperate search began. The sharp crack of hooves against dry earth tore through the morning stillness as Samuel, Naheli, and Ezra fanned out across the sprawling farm and its outskirts. Their breaths came fast, mingling with the chill air, each heartbeat pounding louder than the last. Samuel's eyes darted over the landscape, barren fields, thorny scrub, and shadows cast by ancient oaks. The absence of his youngest charge carved a hollow ache in his chest. Every instinct screamed danger. The fragile thread that bound this fledgling family was now strained to breaking. Yet, amid the panic, they moved with a grim determination born of necessity. Naheli's voice cut through the frantic calls. "Listen," she commanded, every muscle taut. "He's frightened. He won't stray too far. Despite the steel in her tone, a flicker of fear softened her gaze. Her hands tightened around the worn leather strap of her satchel, the only remnant of a past life stained with loss. Ezra rode beside Samuel, his weathered face grim under the wide-brimmed hat. "There's more than wild fear out here," he muttered, scanning the tree line. "Something violent lurks." His gaze met Samuel's, a warning unspoken but heavy with certainty. Hours dragged as they scoured the scrub and dry creek beds, the sun burning higher, yet failing to warm the cold. Not in the pit of Samuel's stomach. Then, by a cluster of jagged stones, the sharp cry of a child shattered the uneasy quiet. Samuel's heart leapt as they raced toward the sound, and there, tangled among the thorn bushes, lay the boy, dirty, disoriented, but alive. Relief surged, only to be drowned instantly by unease. Clutched in the child's small hand was a piece of tattered cloth, darkened by dirt and perhaps blood. A cruel token left by those who'd taken him. Nahela knelt, smoothing a stray lock from her son's sweat-damp forehead. "They marked him," she whispered, voice trembling yet fierce. "A message from those who hunt us." Her eyes, hard and scanning, met Samuel's with an unyielding fire. "The land is not safe." Their joined gazes burned with a silent vow. Protection at all costs. Ezra dismounted, crouching to examine the surroundings, eyes narrowing as he noticed footprints leading away. Not those of animals, but men moving with purpose and malice. "We're dealing with a group," Ezra stated grimly. "Extremists who strike from the shadows, wanting to drive this family, this land, into fear and submission." Samuel swallowed hard, the weight of his new reality settling like a stone deep in his gut. The man who once believed his wealth insulated him from hardship now faced an enemy as relentless as the desert sun. The threat was no longer a faceless suspicion, but a brutal presence that sought to rip apart what little sanctuary they had. Returning to the homestead, the tension pulsed through the farm like a living thing. The workers cast uneasy glances, and distant shutters clicked nervously closed. News of the boy's disappearance had already inflamed the simmering hostility in town. Whispers thickened like smoke. Who was responsible, and whether the Apache family was innocent? But Samuel stood firm at the gate, shoulders squared against the invisible siege. "They will not touch my family," he declared, voice ironclad. "Not while I breathe." That night unfurled with a harshness that matched the wind whipping through the skeletal trees. The moon hung low, casting long shadows that danced across the cracked mud and wooden walls. Suddenly, sharp gunshots cracked in the distance, echoing like thunderclaps in the empty fields. Samuel's heart thundered faster as he grabbed his rifle, the sound ripping through the fragile peace. "They've come," he muttered, voice tight as he rallied Ezra and called for the others to arm themselves. Naheli stood in the dim light, her face a mask of resolute calm, yet her eyes burned with the ancestral ferocity of a people forged in trial. She gathered her children close, the youngest clutching her skirt, eyes wide but steady. "We are tested now," she whispered, "forged like iron in fire. Let them come. We will stand as one." Hours wove into an agonizing vigil. The grown men patrolled the timberline, senses raw. The children, though frightened, found strength in the unified front before them, an unspoken bond forming in the crucible of fear. But the darkest moment came just before dawn. A sudden ambush tore through the silence. Shadows materialized from the brush. A violent, unexpected attack. Samuel was caught off guard, returning fire, but ultimately overwhelmed. A sharp, searing pain bit through his shoulder, forcing him to the ground as the assailants seized him roughly. Naheli's scream pierced the chaos, a sharp dagger of horror and fury. She lunged toward the men holding him, but they shoved her back with merciless force. Ezra tried to fight off the attackers, but was forced into retreat as the radicals vanished into the pre-dawn mist, taking Samuel with them, a grim prize captured from their very heart. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Naheli dropped to her knees, clutching her hands to her mouth, tears burning in her eyes. The children clustered close, their fragile breaths shallow and quick. Her voice broke the relentless quiet. They have taken him, but we will find him. We will not let hate win. Ezra knelt beside her, eyes hard with unspoken promise. We'll gather allies. This ends now, or not at all. The farm lay shrouded in a deadly hush as the first pale light crept over the horizon. Men, women, and children braced themselves for what would come. For the dawn would bring not peace, but a storm. Samuel was wounded and captured by extremists lurking in the shadows of a land desperate for healing. Naheli's eyes burned with fierce determination as she gathered her children close, the flickering shadows of the night casting grim relief on their faces. The sharp sting of loss had settled into the marrow of their bones, but surrender was never an option. Word had come that Samuel, wounded and captive, hung precariously between life and death, in the hands of men who meant to extinguish the fragile hope forged on this hostile land. The firelight within their modest home flickered uncertainly, mirroring the turmoil that roiled beneath Nahale's calm exterior. She paced with taut muscles, mind racing through every fragment of knowledge and cunning she possessed. Her heritage, steeped in resilience and wisdom, now demanded action against this cruel theft of the man who had become their protector and sudden family. Outside, the night held its breath. The farm lay silent but charged, as if sensing the storm to come. Nahale tightened her grip on her eldest son's hand, who clung to her skirt as though it were a lifeline amid the darkness. The younger child, restless and fearful, nestled closer to her. Their wide eyes reflected both terror and a nascent courage, born from witnessing their mother's unyielding resolve. "Listen well," Naheli whispered, voice low but firm. "We will not let them claim what we have built." Her gaze swept over their small faces, imparting an unspoken vow of protection. The moon hung high, a quiet sentinel casting spectral light across the dust-choked land. Tracking the faintest sounds, Naheli moved with the stealth of a shadow, the children's footsteps subdued behind her. Each step was a prayer, each breath a promise wrenched from the depths of loss and hope. Though few words passed between them, the air between the mother and her children was thick with unspoken understanding. This was no longer a mere rescue mission. It was a reckoning born of desperation, love, and raw survival instinct. At the edge of the farm, Ezra quietly marshaled a small band of trusted allies, rugged men and women hardened by frontier life, bound by loyalty to Samuel and the fragile family he had claimed. Their faces were etched with determination and wariness, knowing well the risks they embraced, stepping into the shadows, cast by ruthless enemies. "Tonight, we fight for more than land," Ezra said, voice low but steady. "We fight for family." His gaze met Naheli's. In his eyes was the same fierce fire, the same unshakable conviction. Together, they slipped toward the dark shapes of the captor's hideout, a battered outcrop guarded by hatred and greed. The cold of night pressed down mercilessly, but within Nahele, the heat of defiance blazed brighter, stoking nerves sharpened by loss and years of hardship. Her hands gripped the bow carved in memory of her ancestors, a silent reminder of the heritage that would not bow. Each movement was measured, every breath a thread weaving their resolve tighter. The children remained close, their presence a poignant reminder of the stakes at hand. Nahele's heart beat in rhythm with the rustling grass and distant coyote calls, the wild symphony underscoring an impending clash between light and shadow. A flicker of torchlight ahead revealed the crude campfire around which their foes huddled, voices low and venomous. They were unseen as yet, unaware of the silent storm approaching. Nahele glanced back at her sons, whispering one last instruction. "Stay behind me, trust what you know, and trust me." With that, the shadows lengthened, and the rescue began. Inside the camp, Samuel's breath came ragged and shallow, his wounded shoulder burning with ache and cold sweat. Bound and bruised, he had been a prisoner of hate and bitterness. Yet even in captivity, the flicker of hope remained nestled deep, nourished by the thought of Nahele and the children beyond. He fought the despair that threatened to consume him, recalling the moments of laughter between the three of them, the fragile peace that had begun to stitch their disparate worlds together. That memory was a lifeline tethered to the will to survive. Footsteps and whispered commands outside stirred his nerves taut, a signal that fate's cruel hand was about to etch a new chapter. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the night, a voice filled with desperation and unyielding courage. Nahele. With swift, practiced precision, the circle of captors was broken. Shadowy figures moved in tandem, fierce, silent. Arrows whispered through the night, cutting the air with deadly intent. Chaos erupted. The captors scrambled, surprised by a force they had underestimated. A family born of tragedy, yet tempered with iron will. Nahele fought like the storm itself, fierce and untamed. Every movement was honed survival, every strike a declaration. Samuel was theirs to reclaim. Her children watched, wide-eyed but resolute, their mother's strength forging in them a courage rare and precious. The band of allies joined in, their rifles cracking in the darkness. A thunderous claim of loyalty and retribution. Ezra was at Nahele's side, steady and deliberate, coordinating their desperate dance against the relentless foes. In the tumult, Samuel found his strength again, pushing through the haze of pain and weakness. Released from bonds and lifted by hope, he grasped Nahele's hand. the tether that had pulled him from the abyss. Together, they faced the bitter faces of those who sought to divide them. Their intertwined hands, a testament to a unity forged not by blood, but by shared struggle and newfound love. As the last echo of gunfire faded and the captors fled into shadow, a fragile calm descended. The farm's silence returned, deeper now, loaded with the weight of survival and the promise of battles still to come. Naheli knelt beside Samuel, steadying him with hands rough yet gentle. The children pressed close, their eyes shining brightly in the flickering firelight, symbols of a future uncertain but fiercely protected. But before peace could settle, a sharp voice called from the edge of the clearing, Ezra's, stern and urgent. "Dawn breaks with no mercy," he warned, eyes scanning the horizon, where like vultures, a circle of armed men advanced, their grim shapes framed by the pale light. They had come to tear down the sanctuary built in defiance of hatred. The Farn stood on the cusp of war, surrounded by enemies, by fear, by choices that would decide not only who survived, but what kind of legacy would endure. Naheli lifted her chin, face hard with resolve and fragile hope. Their worlds, once separate, scarred and distant, were now irrevocably and forever intertwined. At dawn, the farm was surrounded. The dawn broke hesitant and gray, casting long shadows over the farmstead, where Samuel, Naheli, and the small circle of neighbors huddled behind weathered fences and shuttered windows. The air was thick with tension, a fragile unity born of necessity, still bruised from wounds old and new. Samuel stood tall among them, eyes sharp under heavy brows, staring down the encroaching threat. The crack and clatter of horseshoes echoed from the ridge, signaling the arrival of a force long dreaded. The farm's borders seemed to shrink under the press of menacing figures, armed and resolute, settling into positions like vultures circling their prey. Whispers of suspicion clashed with unspoken fears as the differences between townsfolk and Apaches threatened to splinter the fragile alliance. Old grudges clawed at the edges of resolve, urging some to falter. But Samuel's voice rose, steady and unwavering. "Hold fast. This land belongs to more than fear. Together we stand, divided we fall." Naheli's steady presence beside him was a silent anchor. The hardships etched into her features gave weight to their cause. Her eyes burned with a fierce calm born of survival. Her children clung close, their small hands gripping the fabric of her skirt, symbols of hope amid the simmering storm. They were the reason shields would not break, the living promise of a future beyond hatred. The siege dragged on, hours marked not by words, but by the tense shift of shadows and the silent prayers whispered under breath. Samuel moved among those gathered, lending strength where despair threatened to sprout. Some faces still bore traces of doubt. Others fought to bury prejudice beneath the urgency of survival. At one point, the youngest child's soft sob broke the silence, a delicate thread of vulnerability that tightened the knot of protectiveness around every heart present. Naheli gathered him close, brushing a lock from his tear-streaked face, whispering a lullaby, ancient as the land itself. The community's warriors held their ground, weapons ready, eyes scanning the horizon for the inevitable strike. The menacing ring of armed figures seemed eager, waiting for the fractures to appear. But in the circle of light, cast by the flickering campfires, an unexpected figure emerged, one wrapped in the dust and stories of the frontier, eyes weathered with age and wisdom. The mediator's silhouette stepped forward from the edge of the assembled ranks, pauses weighing heavy between his words. "Enough," he spoke, voice gravelly but firm. "This land bleeds under the weight of old wounds. There's a peace yet to be found, if hands are willing to reach across the divide." Samuel's gaze met the newcomers, a man known to both communities, and whispered about entails, an intermediary who once walked between worlds like a bridge over treacherous waters. His arrival stilled the rising tide of violence, if only for a moment. Nahela's chest rose and fell with a cautious hope. The children pressed closer, sensing the subtle shift in the air. The hard lines of fear gave way, ever so slightly, to the possibility of dialogue. Conversations began in low tones, words heavy with history and the promise of compromise. Samuel and Naheli stood shoulder to shoulder, embodying the fragile bridge between two worlds, seeking to learn from each other. Still, the weight of suspicion clung like smoke. Not everyone was willing to lay down their arms or open their hearts. Samuel felt the eyes of his neighbors darting between ally and outsider, friends and foe. Yet as the sun dipped low once more, bathing the land in a blood-hued light, the seeds of unity found fertile ground in the shared hunger for survival and family. The mediator's proposal echoed through the quiet, a truce forged by mutual risk, an unspoken challenge to Samuel and Naheli to either bind their lives more firmly together or risk losing all. The farm, once again, held its breath beneath the fading sky. A choice hung like a blade over them, sharp and unforgiving. And the dawn would bring decisions that no amount of courage could easily soften. The weight of the community's eyes pressed down on Samuel Caldwell as he stepped onto the worn wooden steps of the town hall. His gaze did not waver. He carried not gold in his hands, but something far more fragile, a cause that demanded courage. Behind him, the quiet strength of Naheli stood firm, her presence a silent pillar beside the two children clutching her skirt, faces set against the unease that rippled through the gathering crowd. The murmurs of disapproval, thinly veiled suspicion, and hardened doubt carved deep lines of tension in the heated room. Old resentments surfaced, mingling with fear woven from years of pain and misunderstanding. In the eyes of many, Naheli and her children were outsiders, shadows lingering on a land steeped in blood and broken promises. Samuel inhaled slowly, feeling the raw edges of history scrape against his resolve. The choice he now made was no mere defense of property. It was a stand for the family that had grown from those fragile roots, delicate yet unyielding. He began to speak, his voice steady, but charged with the weight of every heartbreak he had borne. "This land," he said, "belongs to those who plant love, not just seeds, to those who are willing to open their hearts beyond old fears." He looked directly at the faces that bore the scars of conflict and hardship. Naheli is not just a guest here. She is my family. Her children, these children, are the future of this land, blending the strength of two worlds. Our legacy must be one of unity, not division. Whispers rippled outward, some softening, others hardening like stones beneath tired feet. The room held its breath, tangled in the uncertainty of change. Naheli stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute, carrying the quiet dignity of her people. "We do not ask for charity or pity," she said. "We ask only for respect, respect for the land that nurtures us all, for the lives we strive to rebuild together. My family honors the earth and its rhythms, just as yours does. There is no shame in joining hands if it means peace." Her children watched, eyes wide but shining, their small hearts mirroring the hope growing between their parents' words. Samuel's gaze swept the crowd. "I know fear runs deep. I have lived it. But hatred breeds only loneliness and loss. To protect what we have found here, I ask you to see us truly, not as threats, but as people bound by the same dreams." A long silence followed, thick as dust settling over the floorboards. Then, one by one, voices rose, not all in agreement, but each carrying the weight of consideration. Old grudges whispered from cracked lips. "This land was won with blood," a man growled from the back. "We cannot simply erase that." Samuel nodded, acknowledging the bitterness as part of their shared history. Blood was spilled on all sides. But it's our choice now, whether to let it define us or to forge something new. Another woman's voice broke through, softer, yet firm. "If he stands by the Apache woman and her children, then I stand with him. They too deserve a chance." The ripple of murmurs grew louder, hesitant, fragile, but present. Some elders shifted uncomfortably, caught between tradition and the stirring winds of change. Naheli lowered her gaze briefly, then met Samuel's eyes with a spark of unspoken promise. Together they bore witness to the fragile bridge being built, step by wary step. But as the room began to sway between fear and hope, an old bitterness clawed suddenly upward, snapping the fragile thread of peace. Whispers and pointed glances coalesced, and a careless threat pierced the air, a warning veiled in the guise of concern. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he held firm, refusing to let shadows distort the bond he had forged. When the meeting drew to an uneasy close, the community departed in clusters, some with lingering doubts, others resolute in acceptance, but all changed by the exchange. Outside, the sky was darkening, the low-hanging clouds pressing down like the uncertainty that gripped the hearts within the hall. Samuel stood beside Naheli, beneath the cold canopy, their hands intertwined, an unspoken vow that this family, once strangers, would endure. "Whatever comes," he murmured, "we stand united." The children, huddled close, looked up with solemn eyes that held both fear and trust. Behind the fading light of day, the town's whispered council began forming plans. A decision loomed that would shape all their fates. As the last shadows lengthened, a word spread swiftly through the settlement. A meeting would convene soon, a council gathering to vote on the future of Naheli and her children. The farm, the family, and the fragile hope born of courage awaited the turn of fate. and the community's judgment was soon to be cast. The final threat descended like a shadow over the Caldwell farm. In the fragile dawn light, the distant rumble of hooves grew louder, the silhouettes of armed men pressing ever closer around the wooden fences and weathered buildings. Faces once filled with suspicion had softened into cautious resolve, yet the weight of uncertainty hung thick between the gathered defenders. Samuel stood at the forefront, his eyes hard with determination, but tempered by the uncertainty that only a lifetime of loss could teach. Nahele's hand found his, steady and warm, grounding him amid the mounting tension. Their children clung close, small but fierce, the living symbols of the fragile hope that had blossomed in this hard land. The farm was more than a patch of earth. It was a home stitched together by shared pain and profound love. A sanctuary poised on the precipice of perhaps its greatest trial. As the first arrow pierced the dawn, flying swift like a serpent through the silent air, the farm erupted into a fierce defiance that blazed brighter than fear. The attackers surged, but the defenders stood unwavering. Samuel lifted his rifle deliberately. Each shot, a promise, echoed in the hearts of those he swore to protect. Nahele moved with the grace and ferocity of her ancestors, her bow singing death to each threat that dared approach. The children, though young, showed bravery beyond their years. Sheltered moments of laughter replaced by fierce resolve as they huddled close to the adults. Together, neighbors, outcasts, and family melded into a single force, fighting not just for survival, but for the right to forge a new future beyond borders and hatred. The battle was brutal, the land itself seeming to shudder under the thunder of gunfire and pounding hooves. Men fell. Cries pierced the smoke before silence claimed them. Yet amid the chaos, the figure of the mediator stepped forth, his voice carrying through the clash. "Enough," he commanded, weathered, hands raised, not in surrender, but in authority. "This land has spilled too much blood. There is no victory in further war." The fighters faltered, the fire within their eyes mingling with the dawn's pale light. Old wounds tugged at their souls, and the mediator's words wove an invisible thread of peace into the heavy air. The attackers hesitated, their faces betraying the fatigue of endless hate. Samuel lowered his weapon, stepping forward, voice carrying steady and clear. "We have fought, yes, but more than that, we have stood together, not as enemies, but as neighbors. This land is ours all, to share or destroy. I choose to share." Nahele emerged beside him, her gaze unwavering, strength incarnate. "We have suffered, and still we rise, because love and family are our true inheritance. This farm, these children, this home, they are the proof that crossing divides is not weakness, but courage." The children's eyes shone bright with hope as the tension began to loosen like a breaking dawn mist. Slowly, understanding began to ripple through the crowd, suspicion yielding to recognition of something rarer. the possibility of peace. Days passed under a tentative truce. The mediator's presence bridged centuries of bitterness, reminding all that survival was more than mere endurance. It was the choice to believe in something greater than old grudges. Naheli and Samuel, once two worlds apart, now stood as beacons of a future unwritten. But the test was far from over. News of the truce rippled beyond the farm, and with it came a summons to the town council, a gathering that would decide the fate of Naheli and her children. The hall filled with faces etched by weariness and guarded hope. Some allied in courage, others shackled by fear. When Samuel stepped before the crowd, he bore neither gold nor threat, only the raw truth of a heart transformed. "This family," he said, voice steady, "is my home. Their lives are intertwined with mine, just as the land is beneath all our feet. To reject them is to reject part of ourselves." Naheli's voice followed, calm, proud, unwavering, carrying with it the dignity of a people who had long endured and yet sought only a place to dream and belong. "We do not ask for charity," she declared, "but respect. We offer our hands and hearts for the healing this land so desperately needs." Murmurs rose and fell like gentle waves over a rocky shore, resistance giving way to reflection. Stories of pain mingled with cautious acceptance. The vote was close, the air taut with breath held and futures balanced. Then came the final tally. Acceptance. Naheli and her children would remain. A fragile victory, yes, but a victory nonetheless, born of courage, love, and the enduring belief that family transcends blood and history. Outside, as twilight bled into night, Samuel looked over the farm with new eyes. The true wealth he had sought was not gold nor land, but the family he had found and fought for. His heart, once a fortress, now opened wide, the walls torn down by the simple, undeniable power of belonging. The children played under the watchful moon, their laughter a balm against scars both old and new. Naheli stood close to Samuel, their hands entwined, a silent pledge that no matter what storms might come, they would face them together. But even as peace settled, a quiet shadow lingered. A muted warning whispered on the wind. The paths of the frontier remained dangerous, and acceptance was a growing light, not a guaranteed shelter. Yet in the face of that uncertainty, a new legacy was being forged, one of unity, resilience, and profound love. The farm, once a lonely expanse, now thrummed with life, a testament to the power of compassion to heal even the most enduring wounds. And as dawn promised a new day, Samuel, Naheli, and their children embraced the future, together, unbroken, and finally home.